start to identify how these proteins cycle.
It estimated that by the middle of the century,
actually makes your stress hormones go down faster.
Welcome to Brainwaves, a new podcast exploring big ideas, produced at the University of Colorado Boulder. I'm Paul Bake. In this episode, we're looking at cheating in sports. What counts as cheating? Could a prosthetic be a form of cheating? And does the question of cheating even matter if everyone is cheating the same way? These are all questions sports leagues, their fans, even governments are trying to tackle. Leading off for us today, Carrie Higgins. She's a former pro cyclist, spent a decade competing nationally and internationally, seeing the pressure to cheat affect a lot of people at the top levels of sports. She now coaches a junior cycling team here in Boulder. Welcome to the show, Carrie.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
What are the conversations going on in cycling post-Lance Armstrong, post-blood doping?
Are we post? I mean, that's how I start that off, and really the conversations are everyday conversations, and they've been occurring since Lance Armstrong, which is we hope it's done, but I don't think anyone truly believes that sport in general, and we're not just talking about cycling, but professional sport in general is clean, unfortunately. I mean, that is the raw truth.
It's pretty widespread.
Yeah, I'd have to say it is. And anytime you have a factor of what separates people from having a lot of money, there's going to be people who choose to cheat. It's not everybody. And I think that's the conversation.
Is money really the driving factor?
I mean, money and winning, you add those two factors with also the factor of people being able to put their ethics or morals aside, or having different ethics and morals than a lot of other people, I think you're going to find cheaters in anywhere in life, unfortunately.
What does the pressure to cheat in elite sports look like? When you're in a sport, What do you see?
Well, I think you see when you get to that top 2%, that top 1% of being the best in the world, it is little tiny factors that make the difference. And it's little tiny factors that are you're eating, that's not even a little one, but I mean little small things of how you recover, how you sleep, what kind of night did you sleep, what kind of travel did you have, what kind of recovery apparatuses are you using? I mean, there are small factors. So when you get to that 1% in sport, people are willing to bend the rules, and I feel like that's probably how it starts. They're bending the rules a little bit to give themselves the upper advantage, and then it just kind of snowballs from there.
Do you feel like there's a lot of internal justification for bending rules or worse?
Sure, and I think we saw that a lot with the Lance Armstrong thing in cycling, right? The justification was everyone's doing it. The justification was, well, my team is helping me do this, so it must not be that bad. The doctor's helping me do this, it must not be that bad. Well, I know everyone else on the team is doing it. We have to do it. They're going to fire me if I don't. So I think there is justifications, and I think for a lot of different athletes in different sports, but cycling also. In other countries, you have it. If they make it big, they're out. They've got financial freedom for themselves and their family. We don't see that as much in the U.S. I personally feel like we don't see as much doping in the professional levels in the U.S. But I think that's maybe one of the factors is that we have, not everybody, but a lot of people have the ability to get education and to find jobs and to make it, quote unquote, without it being sport. In some other countries, if they don't make it in cycling because they've been told they have to by the age of, since they were 12 years old, if they don't make it, they might be in the potato fields. I mean, so I do feel like that's a huge factor in other parts of the world.
You are a youth coach. Mm-hmm. How do you talk to your team about cheating?
I think we're leading by example when we work with youth, and I think that's why I find so much pleasure in it, because I really find it easy to be a mentor, to be a good role model, as long as you're just doing things ethically. And for me, that's not a problem. When you're 14 or 15, the conversation of cheating is not about doping. It's about small things. It's about making a known wrong turn to win a race, or doing XYZ to make your bike illegally lighter, Well, if you know it's illegal, why are you doing it? And that might not seem like that big of a deal to most people, but if you teach a 15-year-old that it's okay to do XYZ, which seems like a very small way of skirting the rules or bending the rules, but in my mind, you teach them that that's cheating and that's okay. It might escalate from there.
Carrie Higgins, thanks for being with us on Brainwaves. Carrie Higgins is a former pro cyclist and now coaches a youth team in Boulder, Colorado. There can be a fine line between cheating and scientific advancement, but where is that line? Brainwaves' Andres Belton takes a closer look.
So we're measuring his motion from the reflective markers that are on him. And then we're measuring the forces he's exerting on the ground with each leg using that force-instrumented treadmill.
Inside CU Boulder's Applied Biomechanics Laboratory, Director Elena Grabowski is studying the biomechanics of an amputee running on a prosthetic leg.
Well, right now they're passive, and they have one stiffness and sort of one sweet spot that you hit on the ground.
Grabowski is an integrative physiology professor, one of a handful of researchers in the world who study amputee runners and how their prosthetics work.
My research is really focused on trying to understand how assistive devices like prostheses and exoskeletons affect the way that we move.
But her research goes beyond improving prosthetics. Experts seek out Grabowski to determine whether prosthetics offer runners an unfair advantage over able-bodied runners.
The biggest misconception is that they give an athlete some sort of exceptional ability. But prostheses, running prostheses, are just simple springs. So it stores and returns energy, but it can't generate extra energy. The athlete has to do that. So the athlete has to control the device, and that's also a little wacky. Running on a prosthesis is very unstable. It's designed to go in the forward direction, so if you have to negotiate a curve, like a 400-meter sprint, you may be at a disadvantage because you can't get that device to work in a manner similar to your biological limbs.
She's worked for years with elite sprinters and even a long jumper, fighting for the right to compete at the highest levels. In 2012, Grabowski's efforts paid off when South African amputee sprinter Oscar Pistorius made history and ran in the London Olympics. Grabowski and a team of biomechanics scientists had successfully shown that the J-shaped blades he used did not give him a competitive edge. That finding enabled him to become the first below-the-knee amputee to race against the able-bodied Olympians. It also inspired a new generation of athletes with prosthetics to dream big.
Sprinting is really something that demands power from an athlete, and prostheses don't give you any sort of power.
Meanwhile, Grabowski is developing new prosthetics or blades that could enable everyday athletes to do things that are difficult, if not impossible, to do today.
Researching what's out there right now, what's commercially available as a running prosthesis, we can gain some insight into what works and what doesn't work, and then try to build prostheses that would be better at performing regular functions like going out for a run or going out and going walking.
For Brainwaves, I'm Andres Belton.
Joining us now in the studio is Alex Wolf-Root, a philosophy PhD candidate at the University of Colorado Boulder. Alex Wolf-Root, welcome to Brainwaves.
Thank you.
You teach a course called Philosophy of Sports, where you cover the ethics of cheating among athletes. Two well-known cases of cheating in sports are the use of steroids in baseball and doping in cycling. How do you address those episodes in your class?
I think cycling is a good one we can kind of dive in on because of the long history of what we might consider doping in cycling. And there's this idea that for a long time, everyone was doping, so there was nothing wrong with someone like Lance Armstrong doping for all his 7 tours. First of all, obviously that's false. There's evidence of professional riders deciding to stop, and because they didn't want to play that game, they didn't want to dope. There's some interesting statistical data about the overall speeds of the peloton, so not just the top athletes, during some of the times when Lance was skyrocketing to the top. So the evidence doesn't support that everyone was doping, though it does support that a lot were. But even if a lot were, and maybe if you go back into the 40s and 50s, you have it as a case where on the tour and on a lot of these other long stage races, you'd have athletes using pretty much anything to survive. And there, I think, there's probably a lot less wrong. And I think it has to do with what the athletes are desiring from the activity. So in the early days of cycling, you might have athletes competing 200 plus days a year. And the only way they could survive that grueling race structure is by taking all these different supplements that we would now call cycling. But if for them the activity they're choosing to do involves doing whatever you can to survive this, it doesn't seem like it's against any kind of spirit or purpose of the rules. Doping to me seems like it's only even doping, let alone wrong, if there's some reason the athletes, they're engaging in an activity where they wouldn't want to do that. And I think that's kind of up to the athletes. So I think if it were the case that everyone was doping in cycling, the right or wrongness depends on what they want. If they want an activity where no one dopes, then it's problematic. And then, you have this kind of prisoner's dilemma where it's in the interest of each individual cyclist to dope, because that gives them an advantage if no one else does, or it quote-unquote levels the playing field if everybody already is. Or if everyone wants to do it and there's rules against it, then the problem is the rules.
Has cheating itself become the game for some of these athletes? Are the rules just hurdles to overcome?
It does seem in some sense that it is when it comes to the doping stuff, or, maybe the Deflategate changing the equipment stuff or the stealing the sign stuff. So it does seem like there's a little of this metagame when it comes to just how are people going to make more money, which is really unfortunate, because I do think if you polled most athletes, they'd prefer to all play by the rules, even if maybe they want slightly different rules. But because there's not a good way to enforce everything, it's in each individual's interest, if the goal is to win, to change something. So you have you're being pulled in different directions. On one side, you're being pulled, what's the best way to make a living off this very cutthroat activity? And another pull is, what is a way that I can do this activity the way this activity should be done? And you'll see that even beyond just in doping and maybe, flopping in soccer or even, basketball. Like, how do we get the refs to give us what I want? And then a really interesting example I love is the idea of framing the pitch in baseball, with this idea that catchers, some are really good about how they move their body after they catch, to make the ump more likely to call a strike when it maybe should have been a ball. But the idea there is they're using these cool deceptive skills, which you see in the rest of the game, to get around some other rules. So I think the context is key for most of this.
Should sports cheaters be punished, and what should we think about when we're deciding how to do that?
Yes. If we have a rule that we think should be in place, then there needs to be a real reason to follow it. If everyone agrees that, we should ban certain drugs or certain drip systems or ways to, quote-unquote, dope, then the penalty should be worth it. So I'm definitely in favor of lifetime bans in certain circumstances, and I'm definitely in favor of public shaming in certain circumstances. Obviously, the flip side is there is a ton of stuff that is officially banned as doping, which doesn't give an advantage, which you might get completely accidentally. The rules are incredibly complicated. There's a lot out there, and there's a lot of possibility for mistakes from supplements. Obviously, supplements in this country are not regulated. They literally can say anything they want that's in a supplement. And while there's some education out there, it can be better. But harsher penalties in some cases, definitely.
Alex Wolf-Ruth, thank you very much for being with us. Alex Wolf-Ruth teaches philosophy of sports at CU Boulder. Thanks for joining us on Brainwaves. I'm Paul Bake. Listen in next time when we talk about sleep, how we lose sleep, and how to get it back. Thanks to Andres Belton for creating our intro music. Dirk Martin and I produced today's show. Andrew Sorensen is our executive producer. See you next week on Brainwaves.